Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the choices in some of our favorite games and figure out which decision is the right one. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're getting into the third episode of Telltale Games The Walking Dead Season 3. In case you missed any of the previous episodes, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down the series, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. Season 3, Episode 3 of Telltale Games The Walking Dead is called Above the Law. And just like episode 2, we open with a flashback. This time, we're following Javi and Kate as they search a neighborhood for anything that might be useful. It's about 3 months into the outbreak, and they face the zombified remains of one of Gabriel's friends before we find out the true purpose of the season was to show us how the term Muertos was chosen as to reference the zombies.
I don't even know what to call them. If they're not people, if they're just the dead. Muertos.
That's what we'll call them.
In all seriousness, I've always found it kind of funny how no one in the Walking Dead extended universe seems to know the word zombie. Robert Kirkman, the creator of the series overall, has said that is because there's no fiction of the dead rising in the Walking Dead world. But that just seems really wild, since they seem to have religion and churches, and the concept of coming back from the dead is kind of a thing in several religions. But I digress. Javi and Kate make it back to the house after failing to get the propane tank they were looking for and dispatching Gabe's former friend, and it isn't long before they're deciding to leave the house and make for greener pastures. The neighborhood has run its course and they can't keep waiting on David to return. Flashing forward to the modern day, 4 years into the zombie apocalypse, they are reunited with the husband, father, and brother that they thought they'd lost. David is standing over Javi, Gabe, Kate, Trip, and Jesus, staring down like he's looking at ghosts. David seems to have some authority as he orders the guards to lower their weapons, and he gets irritated with Javi for having laid Kate on the ground. Javi explains the situation, and David picks up his wife before heading inside with her and Gabe, while Javi, Trip, and Jesus are escorted to a holding cell. From his initial interaction, it appears the New Frontier, the group that's in charge of Richmond, has a well-established system for handling newcomers. We find out from Eleanor, who's waiting for the group in the holding cell, that she was allowed to enter, though she wasn't allowed to go back for Kate, being told by the guards that they'd go and find the woman. This tells us that they do accept outsiders, at least at times, and that they tend to lean into some kind of process when it comes to accepting those people. But they didn't send anyone looking for Kate. Now, this could be because they were worried about some kind of trap or ambush. Or it could be that they didn't believe Eleanor, or that they simply don't want to waste time or resources on an outsider that they assume was a lost cause. Whatever the reason, the group's connection to David seems to buy them at least some respite, and before long, David is leading Javi to see Kate. The town doctor, Lingard, has managed to stabilize her, and she's asking to see Javier. On the way, David asks Javi about what went down with Mariana being shot, and we learn what happened with David and their mother when they left the house. He'd been forced to leave the city, and wound up uniting with some of the members of his old army unit to survive. The visit to the hospital is short, but Kate manages to get a few minutes alone with Javier by faking pain, and she expresses a desire to leave Richmond as soon as possible. It's clear that she doesn't like the rigid structure of the place, and it gives her a bad feeling. And we'll pause for a moment to dig into that a bit. Javi, Kate, and the kids have spent the better part of 4 years roaming freely around and doing as they pleased. It wasn't always easy, but they had fallen into a routine, and things were going as good as they could have been up until the run-in with what would turn out to be the New Frontier troops at the junkyard. Going from that level of freedom to any society that even resembled the old way of doing things would be a shock for most people. For Kate in particular, Richmond not only figuratively represents her old life and unhappy marriage, but it literally includes the husband she felt trapped with. Javier represents freedom and love, a lifestyle Kate had grown accustomed to, so it makes sense that she would be apprehensive about being in Richmond. Javier, for his part, would likely be torn in the situation. On the one hand, the desire to go back to being on the road with Kate would be strong, But he would also likely want to be there for his brother, as family was clearly an important thing for them growing up. Leaving the hospital, David and Javi head to what amounts to a city council chamber, so Javier can meet with the other leaders of Richmond. David is one of 4 members on the council, with Lingard, Clint, and Joan being the others. Dr. Lingard is a community doctor, Clint manages food production, and Joan is a liaison to other settlements. They supposedly handle all decisions as a group, but as we'll find out, there's a lot more politicking to it than any of them would like to admit. The group seems to be a self-appointed government of sorts. Believing their work to get the community started entitles them to be leaders. This isn't necessarily wrong on the face of it, as being able to build and maintain a settlement in this new world would require a steady hand and a certain leadership style. If they managed to make things work, it would be wrong for an outsider to come in and tell them how they were wrong with little knowledge of the settlement as a whole. We don't know how the majority of the people are getting along, and we don't have enough information to make a judgment on them just yet. We find out through the conversation that they had another settlement in the past that didn't work out. They don't really share the details about what happened, but they do disclose that they trusted the wrong people, and things went bad. Whatever happened, it led them to the decision to brand themselves and anyone who wanted to be a part of the community as a way of testing and demanding loyalty. Now, human branding has been used for centuries in a variety of ways, so the concept on its surface isn't new. In fact, tribes of people from all over the world have used the same method to signal things like moving into adulthood and allegiance to a group or a leader. The practice is better known, however, as a form of punishment or to mark people as property. But their reasons for choosing to brand themselves aren't entirely clear, and a conversation about the brands doesn't really last beyond Joan saying that they were a crude answer to a difficult problem, and noting that they haven't always worked. Under normal circumstances, someone choosing to brand themselves might be seen as a bit odd by some. But as long as the person is making an informed decision and under no duress, there isn't really a problem. The ethics of self-branding change, however, when you really think about the fact that not everyone would be doing it willingly. The members of the New Frontier might not be holding people down and forcing them, but they are actually forcing people in a way when you consider the alternative is to be thrown out into the world with no walls, little food, and hordes of zombies to contend with. By demanding that individuals undergo a painful process to permanently mark their bodies in exchange for safety and food, the New Frontier shows just how unethical they are. If you have the resources to help people, you have a certain moral obligation to do so. The goal in general should be to maximize well-being, and that goal is accomplished by sharing the abundance of food and safety of being behind the walls of Richmond. While screening potential new members makes sense, as you don't want to let someone who is actively going to cause harm into the community, telling them that they will only be able to join the community and receive food and shelter by accepting a brand from a hot iron goes too far. But Javier doesn't get the chance to join either way, as one of David's deputies, Max, is brought in to accuse him of stealing gas and supplies. This is referencing the encounter at the junkyard, and is the first point in the episode where I was really reminded of just how much the writing, in this season especially, irritates me. Max says he caught Javier siphoning gas and calls him a thief. He even goes as far as to tell Javier that they would have given him the gas if he would have asked. Then he says that Javier was working with Clementine and that she ran a truck off the road to break him free. Javier can argue against this all, but only to a point, and the whole thing seems completely unnecessary. We're still leaning into a chance encounter where Max and his crew, who had no way of knowing the guy they ran into was David's brother, were way out of line. Javier apologized and offered to make things right immediately, even saying that they thought the stuff was abandoned. But Max insisted on escalating things. Then, when brought in front of the council, this whole situation comes back up and both Joan and Clint decide that Javier is a bandit because he was scavenging? I don't normally peek ahead, but in this case, I've got to point out that while Joan turns out to be as crooked as a West Virginia backroad, Clint seems extremely reasonable in other situations. The idea that he would be going along with Joan when he doesn't even know what she's up to yet seems ludicrous. So why is he so quick to brand Javi as a bandit? None of that ultimately matters though, because Javier, Tripp, and Jesus are tossed out of Richmond with the clothes on their backs and a bag of weapons put together by David. Kate and Gabe get to stay as they are David's wife and son, and Eleanor is tapped to be the second doctor based on her great work stitching up Kate's gunshot wound. But David didn't leave the banished group completely empty-handed, as he included a map with directions to what would turn out to be a meetup point. On the way there, they run into Clementine, who ran into a snag while escaping the city and is only now just getting out. The place David marked on the map is an old warehouse that the New Frontier has been using as a safe house for a while. He meets them there, planning to give them a vehicle and some basic supplies and send them on their way with an apology for not being more helpful. And through all of this, we get a couple of revelations. The first has to do with the strife between Clementine and David / the New Frontier. As a member of the group, she stole medicine to try and save AJ's life, and they kicked her out while keeping the baby. This was heartbreaking for Clem, as she loved AJ, but it also doesn't make a ton of sense. As we see in the flashback, they were convinced AJ was dying from some kind of illness, and even with the medicine she gives him, Dr. Lingard tells her the boy isn't going to live. If that's the case, why not let her take him? It can't be because they don't think she can support him, because, again, they think he's on the way out anyway. And it's not like they can get the medicine back out of him to use it in other people. It almost seems like AJ was a prop meant to provide a reason for Clementine to be involved in the story more than anything else. Be that as it may, David tells Clementine that AJ wound up surviving despite their doubts about his health, and that Dr. Lingard had taken the boy somewhere safe, outside of Richmond. The other revelation is that the warehouse is stocked full of supplies from settlements that Richmond had supposedly been on good terms with. Settlements that, as Jesus notes,
"There's spoils from other towns here too. Towns I heard got raided a while back."
As they're coming to terms with what they've found, Max and a couple of other guys show up, and the group overhears them talking about how they've been rolling in spoils. It's clear that Max is somehow involved in the massive stock of supplies being stolen, and he pulls a gun and shoots David before any chance at a peaceful resolution can be had. While David goes after Max, he tells Javi to chase down Badger. The chase is short, and after a brief fight, Javier gets the upper hand, shooting Badger in the stomach with his own shotgun. Knowing that will be enough to finish him off, Javier has to decide if it's worth his time and effort to end Badger's life with a baseball bat to the head. Honestly, I'm never a fan of bringing more violence to a situation than is necessary, and leaving Badger to turn, while not the most moral choice, is the one I take. He's done some horrible things, and letting him become one of the monsters that no one wants to become just feels like a proper ending for him. The moral thing would be to end his suffering fast, but that is really something reserved for people who haven't been monsters. The other option is to end his life in a more brutal way, but like I said, I don't really like bringing more violence than is needed. David was able to corner Max, and he admits to everything, including Jones' participation and endorsement. David wants to shoot the man, but the best option is to keep him alive so he can act as proof of Jones' betrayal. It seems like that would be the end of things, but the group still has to make their way back to Richmond, sneak in and rescue Kate, Gabe, and Eleanor, and remove Joan from power. That doesn't go exactly as planned, however, as Kate isn't happy about staying in town to help David, and Ava shows up to ask Javier for help with the council as David is having trouble. There's a lot to unpack here, but it really isn't as complicated as it seems. Kate's hesitation to stay is understandable, as we discussed earlier, and staying to help David is the brotherly move. David is far from perfect, but we'll discuss him and Javier a lot more in the final 2 episodes of the season, as I think he gets a bad rap. Family in general is one of those things that a lot of people struggle with, and it's been the main theme of this season overall. Joan isn't happy with the fact that David smuggled Javier back into Richmond, but she winds up backed into a corner as Javier and David tell everyone that she's been ordering raids on peaceful communities, with Max providing testimony to back them up. But this isn't enough to bring her down, as she proceeds to justify her actions by appealing to Clint and Lingard using the things that they need, like fertilizer and pills, as examples of the benefits she's brought from the raids. She says that the supplies they've stolen have helped them to sustain their way of life, and that they just need to keep going until they reach self-sustainability. And this is where Joan has gone full villain. She is justifying killing others as a way to help lift themselves up. Rather than working together with those other communities and finding beneficial trades, she's just taking what she wants with no regard for how it hurts their supposed partners. She thinks that because they lost people, because they were unable to sustain themselves in the past, that they are justified in committing atrocities. I would love to say that there is some moral gray area here, that her reasoning makes sense from an ethical standpoint, but it really doesn't. Raiding other settlements and stealing supplies from them is never okay. Might does not make right. You can't just do what you want because you have the power, and having the power, as discussed, means you even have a responsibility to help those who need it. Joan is wrong in every way someone can be. The episode ends with Javier being knocked out as he and David are overtaken by Joan's people, and we have to wait to see the fallout in the next episode. Even though there weren't a ton of major choices to be made in this episode, there were a couple of really interesting ones in terms of moving relationships forward. How did you handle Kate suggesting that she and Javi leave and head out alone? Did you back David up, standing by your brother even as he seemed to be fine kicking Javier out of Richmond? Let me know what your choices were in the comments down below. I release every video early for patrons and channel members, so if you're interested in getting early access, your name in the videos, or just want to help support the channel in other ways, check those out either through the link in the description below or the join button here on YouTube. I've also got a Discord server for the community, and I love to chat about moral and philosophical quandaries, so come hang out there and join the discussion. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.